Welcome back, everyone. So today's video is going to be a little different, and that's because it's secretly a class project. So why is my class project on this channel? Well, because it can be. Also because I actually think it's pretty relevant to what we usually talk about, in that we're talking about cars and we're talking about how us as consumers interact with them. And this is a pretty interesting take on that subject when we talk about automation. So, as we know, technology changes. Technology has changed a ton over the past 60 years, and that's affected cars too. As our definition of automation has changed from being all about doing things faster and with more force, we're now talking about automation being related to doing things intelligently using artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of these new technologies. As that definition has changed, the way we interact with our cars has changed a lot as well. A lot of times now, when you get into a new car, the way you're interacting with automated systems is through other automated systems. It's like layers of automation, and no one would ever have imagined that when we started doing this decades ago. And as we've gone down this journey, our cars have actually been kind of the first exposure we got to new technology up until pretty recently. The first time we saw GPS systems, we saw digital displays, we saw Bluetooth audio, it was all in our cars. And it's an interesting way to look through it. They're kind of time capsules, right? And when we look at automotive technology, it shows us how automation has evolved, and it shows us why it's really important for us to consider that our definition of automation is not something that's constant. When we're talking about systems, when we're talking about designing new things or using existing ones, we need to make sure we're future proof, and we need to make sure we consider how this definition can change over time. And that's really where you all come in, and why you all are watching this video alongside my very intelligent engineering professor. So today, when we're talking about automation technology in cars, we're actually going to be doing it in a three-system approach. So we're going to talk about three systems which all approach automation a little differently. So first of all, we're going to talk about the automation of routine performance that's just normally driving around. We're going to see that through automatic transmissions. Next, we're going to talk about the automation of failure state performance. That's how our cars handle situations that are unexpected or not ideal. We're going to do that through fuel injection. And finally, we're going to talk about situational awareness and how our cars are helping us develop better situational awareness. And for that, we're going to look into active safety systems a little bit. So, enjoy. So we're actually going to start out here on what is a gorgeous April afternoon to talk about that first one. So auto transmissions, got one right here. And these are actually a Canadian invention, fun fact. So they were invented by a guy called Alfred Horner Munro in 1921, way back then. But they were only commercialized by General Motors, the maker of this vehicle, in the 40s. They love their dramatic names at General Motors, so this is going to be a bit of a tangent, but the first one was called the Hydromatic, and then they went through all sorts of great names like the Turbo Hydromatic, the Power Glide, the 700R4. They love their naming, but they're the ones who started this whole thing, and the core function here was to automate the previously human task of selecting what gear you're in as you drive along. If you haven't driven stick shift, you might not know what we're talking about, but if you know, you know. But the goal here was pretty simple. It was to take away that task of choosing what gear you're in and turn it into just choosing what direction you want to move, forward, reverse, or just stay put in park or neutral. It was that simple as a goal. And, as this technology evolved, it really started to come into its own. So, at first, they were purely a luxury item. They were very inefficient, very slow. It was just a show off. But, as the 60s come along, the technology improves, the number of gears improves, and they actually start becoming as efficient as manual transmissions were. That was a big deal at the time. And, as the 80s came along, the electronic control that came into these things completely changed the game. Now, they were performing way better than manuals in most conditions, and that's really fueled the growth we've seen today, where, now they're far more efficient than manuals. They're probably smoother, they're better in even the settings that manuals used to dominate, like off-road driving, performance driving, like the edge cases that most human beings and most operators would never see. But the consequence we've seen from an operator's perspective is that now most people don't actually know how a transmission works or what it does or the purpose of changing gear. And so our knowledge and our understanding of the system has completely changed as the task has been automated away. And in the future, when we have electric vehicles which simply don't need transmissions for moving along, that might go even further. We may just have no exposure to the task of changing gear. We might still be involved with selecting whether you want to go forward or back, but that could be it. Teslas are even trying to get rid of that, where it just guesses where you want to go. So our knowledge really has changed a lot with this routine task being automated away by our automatic transmissions. And it's a pretty interesting place to start. Now, as we stand in front of what is a terrifyingly inefficient engine, we're going to talk about something that actually allows it to be better than it would have been. And that's really saying something. But that is fuel injection. So this was another North American invention. It was actually invented just south of the border in the States by George Bailey Brayton. And it was actually even before the transmission. It was in 1872. So back in the day, fuel injection was only used for diesels. If you know anything about diesels, they're necessary. And Daimler-Benz, Germans, and also now known as Mercedes-Benz, actually commercialized this in 1936 for the diesel engine that they were using. And it didn't actually enter gasoline cars like this one until 1952. It took some time to see its potential in this new application. But what it did is it really automated the human task of adjusting fuel mixture. Now, a lot of you will not know what that is, but if you know someone who has worked with carburetors, or if you have like grandparents, ask them about what it was like in when the seasons changed in their old cars. They would have to go out with like screwdrivers and wrenches to adjust their carbs so they would run correctly in the different conditions, in the different weather, or when fuel quality changed. Anything along those lines required manual operator intervention. And that kind of went away with fuel injection. I don't have to come out here and choke the car or deal with vapor lock or any of that. It's just the computer does it all. And that's all thanks to Bosch and Mercedes. Up until the 90s, they were the only ones pursuing this technology, and they were pioneering it. They replaced the mechanical control for the fuel injection with electronic in the 60s. They integrated it with the rest of the car computers in the 80s. And as that happened, not only did fuel injection surpass the routine performance of carburetors, but it also drastically outperformed them when there was failure performance, when conditions changed and carburetor would mean hours of work. Fuel injection just kind of dealt with it. And that was a big change in the way we used our cars. They're just much more reliable. They're much more efficient now because there is no chance for operator error or any of that mess. Now, today, most cars do in fact use fuel injection, whether they're gasoline or diesel, and they're just way better in honestly every way. As much as I love old cars, this is better. But they're still not perfect. So the human, the operator, does still get involved. So if you've ever got a check engine light on your car come up, sometimes that can be an issue with your fuel injection system. And humans are still involved, but at that point, it's usually not the operator. When we get to that point, these days, it usually ends up being a trained maintenance professional or a technician who knows what they're doing. I like to pretend I do, and I have a code scanner in my glove box, but most people are not weird like me. So it really has moved a lot of the responsibility away from operators and towards the vehicle itself, or to trained professionals who can troubleshoot it if the situation arises. Now, in the future, this is a bit of an interesting thing to talk about because it's honestly just going to go away. All of the technology we've developed is really just obsolete when it comes to electric cars or even fuel cell vehicles. All of this, everything you see only really has to do with using gasoline or diesel in an engine. And once that's gone, all of this goes away. So that technology, that knowledge, all of that will pretty much sadly become lost to history as time goes on. And sometimes that's just how automation goes, right? We have eliminated our knowledge of that task, but eventually, as everything around the technology gets better, the task just goes away. It doesn't exist. So we've improved our failure state performance, and now we're going to get rid of the failure state. So for this last piece, I'm coming back inside because it got very cold standing in front of the car to record the last shot. And there's no other reason for it. But we're going to talk about active safety systems. Now, these are kind of interesting for two reasons. First of all, they don't really automate a task. That's not really their goal, to automate something that the car is doing or that someone would have to do. Instead, their focus is all about improving your situational awareness or allowing you to act in response to things that are changing around. Now, sometimes that does end up being automation, in that it automates the task of checking your blind spots or braking if someone in front of you brakes abruptly. But that's not arguably the focus of these technologies. I'll also mention that we're not going to talk about autonomous driving in this piece. I think that's over discussed, and honestly, I think it's kind of boring because, don't get me wrong, autonomous vehicles are super interesting, and there's a lot of potential there, but it's a technology that's developing, and everyone's already talking about it, so there's no reason to beat that dead horse. Anyways, let's talk about safety systems. So, as I mentioned earlier, this includes everything from like blind spot monitoring systems, forward collision braking, or collision avoidance, whatever it might be. These are active safety systems, and their goal really is to make you more aware of your situations and help you respond if necessary. What's interesting, though, is they kind of pose an excellent contrast between how humans and machines process information. This is a topic that's been explored for decades, and these really do highlight it, because the machine, in this case the car or that system, is constantly collecting and processing information, and it's usually just available to the user whether or not the situation necessitates it. For example, your blind spot monitoring system might have a little light, and that light is going to tell you whether there's something in your blind spot constantly, whether or not you're changing lane, or whether or not it's even relevant in your driving situation. But that's the type of information that the technology allows you to have at your fingertips. And this all really started in the 2000s once again with Mercedes-Benz. And they're the ones who started introducing things into their S-Class, their flagship vehicle, with adaptive cruise control, which now you'll find in pretty much any car, and lane departure warning, infrared vision for nighttime driving, That's an exciting feature that I'm sad has not become more popular over time. But Mercedes-Benz started all of this, and it really took the rest of the world over a decade until the 2010s to start catching on and start building into cars across the spectrum. You know, part of this actually was due to regulatory incentives and enforcement. There have been studies that came out from the NHTSA about how safe they were and how essential they are to the manufacture of modern vehicles. But a lot of this was actually consumer demand, even though at the time the systems were kind of glitchy, maybe not the most reliable things in the world. Consumers wanted to see them in their cars, and we don't always see that. Seatbelts, when they first came out, airbags, when they first came out, people hated them. People found ways to get around them. Some sadly still do. But these are very powerful technologies, and for once, consumers actually wanted to see them come into their vehicles. This led to today in the 2010s, where these are pretty standard in most modern vehicles, and in fact, in many places, they're becoming mandatory. For example, now in some jurisdictions, you need active safety systems to get a 5-star safety rating on your vehicle, and that is a pretty significant motivator for a lot of manufacturers. And, we're seeing this come into play, and as manufacturers get more data and more testing on more vehicles, the reliability is also improving dramatically. So this support of situational awareness that our cars are now giving us has come a long way, and it is continuing to go a long way, partially because this technology is one of the ones that's not going to disappear. Regardless of what sort of vehicles exist in the future, whether they're electric or fuel cell or autonomous, this technology is pretty important and it's pretty valuable because whether it's a human driving or someone else, we need to know what's in your blind spots before you change lanes. And for that purpose alone, we're gonna continue to see this. The one possible debate that surrounds it, however, is if our training and if the way we prepare drivers to handle the roads evolves in response to this, and we no longer teach them how to do the basics like check your blind spots or, stay alert when you're going down the highway at 80 miles an hour, we may risk losing some return to manual performance. We may risk not having people know exactly what to do when the situation gets hairy. But, that is still debatable. And it is generally accepted that even though they are imperfect and there might be compromises associated with them, they are helpful to road safety. Personally, as someone who loves his old cars, such as this one, I see why. Having blind spot monitoring in newer cars is great. It's a game changer, and it really makes me quite amused by the fact that I have old-fashioned convex blind spot mirrors on this thing, and they work, but sometimes the other way just works better. The one last note I'll make on this point as far as our use of these systems goes is really this kind of plays into the piece of our trust in automation, right? We have automated systems everywhere, but how much do we trust them? And do we trust them the right amount? I think as these technologies evolved, and as the situations we subject them to change, we should reconsider how much we're trusting them. When it was an early version, people rightfully did not, but now as they're getting better, maybe we should place more emphasis on the systems and what they could teach us. So, kind of an interesting aspect to what it takes and, how we can safely continue to use these technologies as they improve. So, what have we learned today? Well, if it's like most of my videos, probably nothing. But the point here is that technology changes, automation changes, and as a result, the way we think about automation changes as well. And we've seen a lot of that with cars just because they've been around for so long. But if you look around you at other devices like refrigerators or even sponges, you'll notice the same thing. Just the way technology and automation has changed everything around us is hard to avoid. And we really should understand and we really should consider how these have changed our life, but how they're going to continue to change our life, but also, how so much of what we use and so much of what we interact with is in fact related to automation, whether we think about it that way or not. So there's a lot going on around us, and from a technology perspective, I hope you continue to recognize that and maybe appreciate it a little more just as you go about your day. Thanks everyone. Regular programming will resume once I've passed this class.